Hey, fellow Tears, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. I'm still laughing from the shit we were talking about beforehand. All right, we're back. We're trying to continue our conversation from last week. I said what I think is maybe the only thing that's ever going to feel really controversial to me in a personal way on this particular podcast, but it's really part of our relationship series and stuff that's like really kind of personal. So it's kind of the capper on this whole thing.
Yeah, last week I titled the episode "Nonconformist Relationships." So for those who haven't heard that one yet, you can listen to it. And if not, you're here. That's good.
I should probably because I am working towards an understanding of this for myself, and it's what we do. So for me, what I really talked about was I think it's fine that people can feel all kinds of varieties of love and being in love. I don't think there's anything wrong with feeling that you love more than one person. I don't think you have to feel guilty about that. I don't think you have to feel bad about that. It's not obvious what you want to do about that.
Right.
You know, you have your own ethics, you have your own relational situation. Some of those relationships might be just very close platonic relationships, and some of them might be something that's more, but and it opens up a whole big set of questions. But that's what I was trying to bring up. And I was also trying to bring up something about kind of like, I guess, the metaphysics of it in a way, which for me is, and I've been working towards this kind of myself. So these are important episodes for me. Thank you all for letting me blah, blah, for people who are listening. But for me, it was like, I really look at the world in this way that we're kind of in this enlightenment factory space. And we have these people that we're going to meet that are probably going to be very, very spiritually close to us in a variety of ways, probably in all kinds of roles relative to us: family, friends, kids, loved ones, people that we love, people that we're in love with. And they're kind of our kind of karmic soulmates. I don't see it in a new agey way, but I do see it in a kind of a spiritually transformative way. New agey might be like we all got together beforehand and made a bunch of plans around like some grand, like we're all in an office and we're in front of some big like whiteboard.
Yeah, they
Mapping
often.
everything. I don't think it's like that.
No, they'll talk about it kind of like we're all, and then we are, but like we're actors in each other's plays. There's all these plays going on, and we have various roles.
That's somewhat true, but I get the feeling sometimes they say that we're all sitting around designing a script. Like,
well, right, yeah, that
they'll break my heart over here, and then I'll break Susie's heart, and then the next thing you know, she'll meet Chad, and I don't think that's scripted like that. Personally, I don't see it through that.
No, and I think that also like leads into someone's beliefs about like faith, not faith, but fate.
Yeah.
Being like fate is like it's all predetermined, or a lot of it is predetermined, and I don't take that view personally, because then to me, fate and free will are absolutely polar opposites. And I think that we are, at least me, and probably yourself, are working towards a space of freedom, freedom of choice, freedom of reaction, freedom of response, freedom of being. And if something is fated already, then you're only working towards the flow of fate, the intention of fate. And I'm not sure that, as a thing. But I will say in that book, The Light That Shines Through Infinity, Diane Katagiri did say something that I thought was like quite genius or brilliant, or whatever, came from a deep place. Is that he said at many times when he is sitting in zazen, that he is making the attempt to connect with the intention of the creator or of the universe itself. And
I think that does have a kind of a Taoist-y Chinese Japanese vibe, and I can understand that feeling. And even saying it, like, even for our new age friends, I was kind of teasing, but I don't judge it. I mean, I definitely have had students who have this point of view, and I'm like, okay, cool, I get it. I get you got a point of view, and I'll support your point of view. That was another big thing in the episode last week, which is like, okay, if we could stop judging each other,
sure.
And so anyways, I didn't mean to sound, that's not my intention to sound that way. I was just teasing. And you were being serious about Zen. So yeah, I think there is something to that, though, that feeling that you can kind of feel like, well, this is the proper flow for these events or something, right?
Yeah.
Which can either, I guess, feel local on the ground, in the immediate, or you might feel like, oh, there's a big overriding flow, and I'm trying to work within that or something. I could see all of that, really. So, because that was what really I was trying to talk about with this. And I had like sort of in my own life, multiple people who sort of inspired these kinds of thoughts. I certainly referenced Rumi last week because he's a big person for me. We talked a little bit about Rumi and Shamsa Tabriz and their relationships, which may not have been sexual at all, right? And some of Jung's relationships that were, whatever they were, it's not obvious, but certainly with Sabina Spielrein, one of the main people, it's certainly not obvious that they were, in what way they were physical with one another.
But it was, there was an intimacy there.
Yeah, but she describes it as like poetry.
Right, but I'm saying, but like
more like eros, an intimacy, but maybe not like just like sex. It's
no, I'm not talking about. I'm not. Not intimacy from like the physical perspective, but like energetically, emotionally.
Yeah,
like,
that's right.
It's treated as a near primary or close to primary relationship. Like the way that I kind of am sort of growing into this idea is that you are able to have another person as a means of satiating your immune system. Like, do you feel deeply safe around this person, safe to express deeper aspects of yourself that you may not to somebody else? And this, you brought this up last week with the Esther Perel view of this, which was, I think, unique.
Uniqueness orientation versus what she was describing it more of as like an exclusiveness orientation. And I thought that was really important. Language for me to get out there.
And then like the unique orientation or the exclusive orientation will be people who are just feeling, how did you say it, like people who feel like that their bond is deep because it's bonded with that person. Like, and that's,
I think it's the exclusivity of it is what gives it the special quality for that kind of person.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the unique one is that like each individual relationship has its own unique qualities, and you can have multiple unique relationships simultaneously or in your lifetime. It's not, you don't see it only as this one, only one, that's it.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel like it's a threat because it doesn't undermine for that uniqueness person their feeling of that relationship being special, unique, and so on. Yes. But for the more exclusive minded person, that would ruin it for them.
Yeah.
Whether that's a physical thing or a lot of times even an emotional thing, they don't want other people to even be emotionally close past a certain point because that would kind of ruin it for them.
Yeah. And I like to look at things from like a physical body part, and I just feel like there's a comfort that we have with certain people in our lives that we allow ourselves to be vulnerable with them, sometimes physically vulnerable in a, in that kind of a way, but then also emotionally vulnerable or psychically vulnerable. But both aspects of vulnerability, physical and, psycho-emotional, if you want to call it that, have a level of openness to them that you trust the other person, that you feel safer on the other person, that you can let your guard down, that you're not, you don't have your defenses up, right? We talked about this like some months ago, right? The ego system.
The existential guardian operating system, your phrase for that.
And that you're down, those defenses are down. And I
just come up with a little acronym for eros, because I was looking at some stuff with eros. Existential, whatever you want to do with that. People have not that, review like, of systems though, because that'd be too medical.
But I'm just saying, like, people have this like deeply open sensation, and it's just interesting from like a mental physical view of how someone would want to be that way with only one person, and how that bond can be very unique and very deep, and then how some person can have various aspects of openness with multiple other people and be in that state of openness with not only one but with several, if that's it's just interesting for me to think about in that way.
Esther Perel doesn't talk about them as orientations exactly, but I think that was a good word for my mind. It seems like it's just different ways of approaching life. What I found impressive, like we talked about last week, is that she also uses this language that you could tell it's really from, we're clinicians, in our life, right? And you can tell like she's really talk with people because she's using their language. And we have to go through the whole thing again, but the idea of like boundaries and borders are really important for those exclusiveness people, where freedom to experience, that's the uniqueness vocabulary. They use a different lingo, a different language. I think it's good. And so for me, it was sort of like I want to tell the story of a little bit how I got to this kind of feeling. But it came from people like, tantric masters, Zen masters, Rumi, Jung had aspects of this. What was interesting last week when we were talking about it is, and we'll get back to it because I think these are both important, was you were talking about things more from like a sociological, anthropological point of view, which is really important. But it was also like, I wanted to also talk about like sort of like the existential, psycho-spiritual, experiential point of view. So we're going to balance these things out in this conversation.
There's a lot of big words being volleyed back and forth here, Eric.
Oh, we're gonna go. There'll be big words flying: exclusiveness, uniqueness, existentialism. Who the fuck knows where this is going to go?
We are a garrulous pair.
Yes. The big wheel keeps on turning, and no one knows where it's going to stop in the G&T podcast world.
I like when I host with other people and you're not here. I always say I don't know what I'm doing. You know, I don't know what's happening.
You are Mr. Improv. That is so true.
I do love improvisation. I
never know what you're going to say, so I'm always like, I got to write 17 responses. I know what this frickin' Daniel's going to say.
But I like my music that way too, and I that's I love spontaneity.
No, it's part of you, who you are. You have that spontaneous part of who you are.
It's fun.
And I said, like, we have this tacit agreement in these conversations that we both will have areas of interest and whatever we're talking about, and we kind of go in these very different, and whatever interests are important for us.
Yeah.
So we did the Esther Perel. We got the uniqueness and exclusiveness kind of orientations, and it was so sort of funny about this. I guess the next thing to talk about is really in the whole thing. Well, okay, let me say one thing real quick about this, because there was the whole thing of like, where does this come from was the question you were asking.
Yeah.
But the only thing I wanted to say about, and I think we should talk about that.
Yeah.
But the only thing that really hit me about that, especially if you want to do this in a non-judgmental way, is like, it's here, regardless of
for sure
how it got here and what the reasons were. It's here. And essentially, this is a very like exclusiveness oriented society that we live in America. And probably, Judeo-Christian society, Judeo-Christian Islamic society is very exclusiveness oriented. What entirely that means is really interesting. I'm doing a lot of this research on Jung, and he sees this connection with the religion in ways too, so there's lots of things you could talk about with that.
Sure.
It was a little bit, so I realized after we got off the last episode, it was like, it really depends on who you ask where this came from. I have a perspective, you have a perspective, we're looking at it from a certain vantage, but for other people, they might say, well, because God said so, or Allah said so, or Adonai said so. That's an answer. Right. And we both know people who feel that way.
For sure.
Right. And it's not like I don't want to respect that point of view. Some people might say evil psych things, evolutionary psychology things. I don't agree with that pretty much either. But, there are people who would talk that way. I was a little bit nervous because, though this is such a societal norm, this episode made me nervous to talk about a little bit, and I'll share my own experiences, but that's why I had trepidation about it. And I talked to different people before, we did this. I talked with you, obviously. I talked with other people. It's like, okay, I'm going to do this episode. And but maybe the only subject that I felt nervous about, because it's such a core idea.
Sure.
It's so core to the culture. Our girl Esther Perel talks about this, and because I've been doing work on this subject matter, and she brings this up. She said it's really interesting in American culture. She's from Belgium, right? So she said American culture, this is like the big thing. In other cultures, people don't want to do like divorce as much. They want to keep the family unit together. Right. But American culture decided divorce is the thing you do, right? Especially. Yeah, and so
we're a litigation culture too, though.
Yeah, I think that's right.
You know what I'm saying? So like, that's a big business. Like,
it's true.
Yeah, I mean, like, I put my business head on. They're like, there's a lot of people who are miserable, and we could definitely make a lot of money off of them. So I'm going to be a divorce
lawyers.
lawyer.
We're going to get 10 to 15% of this deal. Yeah.
I mean, I could just speak.
Untrue.
My parents, started their divorce proceedings when I was probably about 7 or 8. And they had a property that they sold in the late 80s, and they made a lot of money on this building, like a lot of money, and they spent all of it fighting each other, all of it. Like that would have paid for college for sure. Even if it invested it, did nothing, left it in the bank and just collected interest, it would have paid for mine and my brother's college for sure. But they spent it in court.
Yeah, it's really weird, because in the extended group of people I know, there's lots of people who are going through divorces now, and like the financial aspects are brutal, obviously, when you see it. It is brutal.
Yeah.
It raises weird, I mean, I guess we'll come back to it. Why does this society decide this one way or another? But she poses the question, and it's an interesting one. Because she says a lot of societies will say, no, we're going to keep the family unit together, even if there's elements of people being involved with other adults. Okay, you acknowledge that happens and you keep the family unit together. That seems to be the Tibetan answer too.
Yeah.
But certainly what's weird to me about it too is like, I'm a Zen Taoist tantric Buddhist person. My worldview is different,
Mm.
you know? So I'll try to explain why this is,
Sure.
you know, but I'll try to talk a little bit about my own backstory. I had one other little quick thing before we do the super personal part, which I thought you would find interesting, which was I talked to the Buddhist goddesses about this.
Oh, good.
And it was interesting. So this is just like maybe the meditative part. We want to do a little meditative stuff here and there for people. So Carl Jung has this idea he calls active imagination, which is kind of like an inner journeying technique. You know, he has that real shamanic part of him, you know, that both of us find super interesting. But it has a kind of a deep tradition. Like there's Rabbi Nachman, who would just say like, well, just talk to God. That's a meditative technique. Talk with God. So you just start talking and then you kind of see what's produced out of that. And it looks like Jung was tapping into similar ideas. He would go through and he would just journey inside of himself. He did a lot of visualizations, sort of hypnagogic states, you know? So he tried to get in these kind of altered states. And then he would talk to these figures that would appear, who certainly felt to him like they were, he always is funny about that. Is this part of my own psyche and archetype, or is it some other force of the universe I'm talking to that's personifying it in this way? But he had like someone who identified inside of him as sort of a Gnostic philosopher from Alexandria back in the past, who he called Philemon. And we talked about this a little bit last week. He did these inner journeys.
Yeah.
And so I kind of I do this as some part of my practice. It's interesting. Gelik Rinpoche, you know, passed away. One of our teachers would say, like, do that, talk and see what happens. And it's really interesting because I did talk, and there's like kind of three main practices I do. And it was an interesting experience for me, Daniel, because I talked and I said, well, should I talk about these things? Should I try to write this book? Should I try to do these things around this? And I thought I would get a chorus of answers, like they would all agree. It's like one big chorus would tell me what they thought. But actually, it turned out no. They all said different things. And I was like, this is so interesting, you know? And they didn't say what I would expect even, which I suppose was part of Jung's experience. When you have these experiences of connecting in this way, whatever that is you're connecting to may say things that surprise you. And it's something I think that you think about, Daniel, that sort of tells you it's not coming from your own ego. It's coming from something else. Do you agree with that general framework?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I got three different answers for one of my main practices. I kind of usually check in with her when I'm doing a divination or whatever. And her answer was really interesting. She said, well, and I was surprised. She basically said, I don't know if this really matters one way or the other.
That's good validation.
If you do this or don't do this, in the sense that she was saying your job in this lifetime is to try to get enlightened. Maybe this will impact your being to be able to like progress on that. Maybe it won't. Maybe it's just not going to do that. So you can do it if you think it has meaning to you. She was kind of communicating, but you know, kind of up to you at this point. But the main thing she was saying, I'm trying to tell you the main thing was that you need to work on your enlightenment practices, and you know, that's the more important thing. And so whether you do this or not, okay. But as long as you're doing this other thing, that's the more important thing. And I was like, okay, I didn't expect that answer. You know, then I talked with Tara, goddess Tara, and she was like, yes, do it. And I felt this wave of kind of her energy, which is kind of soft and compassionate, you know, and her attitude seemed to be something like, yes, this is an act of compassion that you're doing this, and other people may benefit from hearing this in their own ways, whatever it means to them. So you should do this. And I was like, okay. And the way I got it, and this is a little bit maybe my thoughts as much, I was like, well, there might be people who have specific questions about love and relationship like I do, and they're asking things that are similar, but kind of what we've been talking about over the episodes. Maybe it's just they feel conflict in some other part of their lives that doesn't have to do with this, but hearing people talk about these points of where they're trying to figure these things out, where there is conflict between themselves and the outer world, especially the outer social world, can be useful. So there was a big wave of like, yes. So I was like, okay, I've gotten two different answers here. My first real set of tantric teachings I got was from the Buddhist goddess of love, like the Buddhist Cupid. And you'd be like, there's a Buddhist Cupid? Yeah, there is. And from her, it was a real solid, like, yes, you do this, you know, very strong yes. And I was like, okay. and then I was like kind of going like, well, why? And she was like sort of more in the vehementness with which she said yes was that there's a way now where there has to be new visions of what love means. Now, this is the time for now. And even if like our recording this, we're not going to change the society through this recording. We were talking about that last week. You know, we're not going to like, all of a sudden we're going to go to the Joe Rogan levels. And everyone's going to like change their mind about these things because we're talking about this. But she was kind of like, it has to be out there in the environment. New ways of thinking about this have to be out there. Does that make sense to you too?
Mm-hmm.
So it was sort of like different answers, and I got like different counterpoint or something, different layers of music on top of one another, but not all the same answer. So anyways, I thought that was kind of interesting, right? So I know, anything about that practice more that you want to add before we move on? I mean, you do things like that. I was kind of sharing my own experience with it. Anything else you want to share about that?
No, I mean, I think it's just, for people who are listening, and if they're like, the fuck is he talking about?
Wouldn't be the first time.
Right. Wouldn't be the first time. But I think the only thing I would like to say really is that like, it's good to have your own internal source of inspiration, right? Whether that be via Buddhist goddesses, or let's just call it inner divinity. We'll just call it like this, or whether that be some kind of like philosopher that lives inside of you, or whether it be an architect, however it is, or Jesus or Muhammad. I mean, whoever. It doesn't.
That's not a crazy idea to think that you're doing that.
No, it's not. It's not. And related but not related, I had a patient of mine who I haven't seen for a while because they had a health issue that they had to have surgery for and whatnot. And he was explaining how he had this like huge kind of like cyst or something at the bottom of his spine that kind of like erupted. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he said as soon as that thing broke, his back pain that he had been dealing with for a few months disappeared.
Yeah, I could see that.
And when he spoke, right, we as Chinese medicine practitioners, we get it, but I haven't seen him for a couple months.
Yeah.
So he came in today and said he was talking with his doctors about it, and they were like, that's not related. They're not related. But when I talked to him about like chi and the different channels, things like this, he goes, see, I knew I was right. And so I say that story to bring it back to this, because a lot of times we are, and we can take external kind of information and try to bring it in and break it down and make it our own. But like, ultimately we have to rely on our own choice. At the end of it all, we are the ones who make the decision to do something, to not do something, or whatever. And if you have a system of like internal checks or internal inspiration that you can go towards, that gives you a large feeling of empowerment. I mean, at the end, Eric, you have to decide, am I going to do XYZ, write the book, talk about this story, in an open way on a public forum or whatever? You have the final decision, but you can feel very empowered in your decision and then the results that come from it, because you're like, I am making this decision with all of my like strongest inputs all behind me one way or another. And I feel like I have all the pertinent information that I have at this time to go forward with this. So I just wanted to emphasize that particular point,
I mean, I think as far as a practice goes, if you would have asked me back when I was a physics major at U of C or something, that I'm going to sit in a room and like in my imagination, talk to a Buddhist goddess, I would have been like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Right.
So I'm not like, I don't know what to say about some of that. Like I'm a Midwestern, like South side of Chicago person. We don't sit around talking to Buddhist goddesses.
Unfortunately, a White Sox fan. That's just
terrible fucking disaster. You have to get like recommendation from the goddesses for all of that. Like you need rituals and like
apologies to our international audience who don't give a shit about baseball, but Eric doesn't either, so it's fine.
I love the White Sox in a strange, like masochistic way.
Yeah.
It's because you watch sports as a kid. I'm sure everyone like in other countries will be like, I always grew up watching whatever
their team was.
Football team is in your soccer team in your particular range. And you're like, God, they're in agony. So that's what the White Sox are. They're a perpetual agony. Then one year they win, and then there'll be another 80 years. No, anyway, so it's one of those things. So as far as a practice goes, as weird as it sounds, this is what Rabbi Nachman was talking about. Just maybe get yourself quiet at some point. Start vocalizing your thoughts and see what your mind produces back. And on some level, if it's really, you think it's only just your imagination, then you're tapping into some other part of yourself, some collective unconscious part of who you are that maybe tell you different things. You certainly can think of it that way. You don't have to get too metaphysical with that. You're tapping into other parts of your own imagination. Or maybe if you do feel like, no, I'm tapping into some other aspect of even outside of myself. I think Jung came to that conclusion ultimately. But you don't have to. You can think of this in different ways. But it's an interesting meditative practice.
Yeah.
Probably learn something.
When I teach the shamanic course, which will probably be next year again, I'll make announcements for that. People have a very difficult time believing what it is that they see when they're journeying, And there's a number of my friends and former current students who are listening to this. So hello, everybody. Particularly Angie. Hello, Angie. I know you'll hear that and smile when you hear it. But like, people have a very difficult time when, they have to go get some information or learn something, from a guide, if you want to call them that, when they're doing their meditation or their journey. Again, however you want to label it, it's fine. And this very question comes up: am I making it up, or is it coming to me? And what I like to say to people is that, like, in the end, it doesn't matter if the information is pertinent. So I feel like, what do we say a long time, like regularly, like the teachings are antique, but the teachers are contemporary. And so if the information is pertinent and it's communicated to you via something that you are familiar with, you might be more accepting of that information. Or maybe you'll be more accepting of that information if it's absolutely, completely abstract. And you're like, I could not have made that up. Therefore, it must be more real because I couldn't make it up, because you don't trust your own psyche for some reason. Either way, it's there for you. So you might as well take the opportunity to shut the fuck up, and listen and see what you hear, because you don't know, and if you already had the answer, then you wouldn't be seeking out further, support or denial for what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird for me because I really expect all three of these beings in my own imagination or in the universe at large.
Yeah.
Like, speak as a chorus. I expected it to just be like, okay, we're all going to harmonize together and say the same thing, but they had different perspectives.
Yeah.
I think this was Jung's experience with these archetypes. He was like, I wouldn't have thought of it that way. Maybe some part of him did, and he was tapping into that part, or maybe he was tapping into something else. But, you'll hear things that you didn't expect.
Right.
So, yeah. All right. So, okay, on the really, really personal side, and then, I'll probably share some of my personal stuff, and Daniel will share whatever he feels like he wants to share too. For me, my first encounter with Jung came back at University of Chicago. We talked about this maybe some episodes ago.
Yeah.
And it was in a class on personality. And the guy who was teaching a class was a Dr. James Anderson. I remembered his name so long because I had the reader and I still kept it and actually used it, like articles in it, to prepare even notes and things for classes. I can't find it now, so I got to like dig it up and find where it is, because I got a little bit of news on this, Daniel. I actually looked this dude up
okay,
online, and he's still in Chicago.
Oh,
Dr. Anderson from UFC. I wasn't sure if he's even still alive, but he's still around and kicking. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an appointment with him, and just go say, hey, you influenced me a lot in this class. I want to talk to you about this thing. Apparently one of his big interests is like psychobiography. He likes to write psychological biographies of people. And I was like, okay, I'm trying to do one. So I think I might just make an appointment and like go and talk with him, even if I had to pay him some money for a clinical appointment. I'd be curious to see, because it was a strange thing that happened in the class. So basically what happened was he was talking about Jung, and there's lots of things you can say about Jung because his life was really interesting. But then he told this anecdote because he knew someone who knew Jung personally. Henry Murray, this famous psychologist. We could talk about Henry Murray in the other episode. Doesn't matter for us now. But he traveled to go meet Jung.
Yeah, we did talk about it.
And the idea was, ultimately, they talked about sort of psychological theory for a week. And then eventually Jung, like, they were out on his boat on Lake Zurich. Apparently he would take patients sometimes out in the boat too, and they would just have their sessions on the boat out in nature.
When you're
so they're out on this,
you could do that.
Yeah, they're out on the boat, and they're, Jung is an older guy at this point, and he eventually was like, well, why are you here? And Henry Murray admitted, like, well, I'm in love with two people. I don't know what to do. And Jung said, okay, I understand. And then this is how I solve this problem in my life. People will solve this in different ways. And he just made recommendations to him. He said, well, sometimes you can be in love with two people, and if you can work the relationship out, maybe that's fine, And I think Henry Rory went back relieved. And then I think he did do that. He had two people who loved him in that way. And that's how the story ended. But it was such a weird thing in a class. I don't think I'd ever heard anyone tell a story like that in a class before. So it really struck me. I was like, huh, it wasn't like, it was so personal and so different. I don't know if you've had this experience too. It's just one of those things in your undergrad class, you don't expect to hear that. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Or you agree or disagree? I don't know.
No, I mean, that's the beauty of education.
Yeah. It was such a personal story that had to do with him knowing this guy to share this anecdote that I probably never would have heard. And a lot of books about Jung didn't have that information. Sure. Nobody knew that back when I was in school. And so when I was reading his stuff, I could always have that with kind of in the back of my mind, because he explained a lot about Jung's life, and these more personal aspects of Jung's life too. Because he wound up like having this woman he was involved with too, Tony Wolff, and he had like sort of like these two women in his life for like 4 decades. So, it's an intense part of his life and his experience, and that allowed me to see his work in a different way. Anyways, that happened. I was a student at U of C in this undergrad. Now, by a weird twist of synchronicity, and I was trying to remember even the order of this, how these events played out. I mean, I must have heard the Dr. Anderson thing first before this other event happened, but this is the personal story for me. So I'm an undergrad. I had my first love. We had known each other since we were I think I was 18 when we met. I was sick as a teenager, so this was the first big love I had. It took a while. I had a lot of health problems when I was in my teens. There's kind of no doubt that we really loved each other. Susie, my first big love. I had mentioned her name a little bit earlier. I realized Freudian slip.
Freudian
but
slip.
I think it would be fair to say at the time we were both kind of troubled people. We weren't fully formed beings yet. So we had a fiery relationship. We would argue, but we also had kind of like a deep connection between the two of us. Probably the first of my feeling of like, okay, this is a romantic soulmate relationship. This is something real is happening here. And we all have our own stories around this, obviously. But for this particular thing relevant to this, the main episode begins where now we've been together for some years. We were in our 20s, early 20s. She was going to DePaul University in Chicago, and I was going to the University of Chicago. We met at her dorm a lot of the time. We were in actually the first floor of the dorm. I don't live that far away from it, so I think I drove past it today where this event happened. But we were sitting there, and she's like, I don't remember how she started even the conversation, but she said it was obviously something important she wanted to talk about. And she basically said, well, here's what I think needs to happen. I love you. I don't want to lose you, and I want to be with you, but we haven't had enough experience with other people. So I think we're going to have some kind of relationship where we're able to be together, but we have experience with other people too. And I remember just going, what is she talking about? What? And I had never heard anyone say anything like this before in this direct way. Retrospectively speaking, thinking about it, for talking about this, I loved her and I still respect her. And she just was like, I don't know what else to do. Let me propose this thing. I know it sounds crazy, but how about this? Because I don't want to lose you. And yet the idea that we haven't enough experience is eating away at me on some level. And I think I said something like, well, let's take a vote and see if the motion passes. You vote yes, I vote no. Motion doesn't pass. And then she said something like, no, I think this motion is going to have to pass. And I really had to think about it, and I think even sitting there, I was like, well, maybe this has to happen, because I did love her. But it really got my mind turning in a kind of a different way. She's a very Aquarian person, new ideas out of her own noggin. And I think the thing that I remember thinking about a lot was like George Harrison from the Beatles. I grew up listening to the Beatles. I think the Beatles are really good. Some people like them, some people hate them, but I think they're good. I know their story, so, and the real story with George Harrison was that, Eric Clapton, the guitar player, George Harrison, they were best friends. Eric Clapton fell in love with like George Harrison's wife, Hattie Boyd Harrison. So I knew this whole backstory. And what had always impressed me about it was George Harrison like had to be in this situation where publicly he had to say, okay, I love both of these people. He's my best friend. She's this woman that I love. And I think he kind of realized this relationship is ending. It's not really working between us. So, but it's like publicly potentially embarrassing. He's a Beatle. You know, when Martin Scorsese did the movie of his life, George Harrison, he did this big documentary, they showed scenes of George Harrison having to answer questions about this. You know, in public, people going up to him saying, well, you know, Eric Clapton, your best friend's now with your wife. What do you think about that? He had to answer these questions, you know? And it was a whole big drama. I mean, that Eric Clapton song Layla is written about George Harrison's wife. It's like the trivia of that song, right? So he had this, you know, whatever this is, deep love for this, his best friend's wife. He sings about it, you know? So it's a crazy situation. What was always striking about George Harrison for me is he took this very idealistic road. And he just said, well, I love these two people. If I'm really true that I believe that, I'm going to have to accept both of them.
Right.
Right. So I'm going to keep him as my best friend. And he did. Right. And he kept a good relationship with her, you know, and he accepted it in this very public way. And I was always very impressed with that, I guess, even as a teenager or something. I was like, wow, look at that. You know, this guy really stuck to his principles, or stuck to his beliefs. He valued love. He sung all these fucking songs about love with the Beatles, and he did it, you know? It wasn't just, I want to hold your hand or something, you know? He really, like, he took the higher road, and I was very impressed with it. So in this experience with Susan, I was like, okay, well, if I really believe that I love her, and plus I knew she was right. I mean, I knew what she was feeling. It wasn't like I didn't, you know? I was on a different campus from her, and, you know, you'd find yourself on the campus making eyes with someone in the library, and you'd be like, okay, it's not like she's wrong. I know the feeling. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to back her play on this. And so I did. And I basically said, okay, I'm in. Let's do this thing in the way that you're talking about. And I remember it got to her first time where she was going to go out with somebody else. And, you know, Chicago, the way the layout of the city, she was going to go. I went to University of Chicago, but I lived in a different neighborhood. Unfortunately, I lived near the White Sox Stadium. Depressing. That's the most bummer part of this whole story. I could see whenever the White Sox would shoot fireworks, if they hit a home run, you know, we could see it from our window, but how often would they hitting home runs? Very rarely. So we got practically no fucking fireworks. But in any case, I lived around that neighborhood, you know, like a drive from University of Chicago. But it turned out the guy that she was going out with was in that same neighborhood for that first date of hers. And I was like, okay. So she was going to go take the train down there in the night. And I was like, you can't go doing that. Like, you know, you might not get back to super late. I don't want you riding on the subway in the night. I'll be super worried about you. No. And that wasn't even obviously she was going to have sex with him or something, but, you know, who knows when she's going to get back. And I was like, I don't want you doing that. It'll be dangerous. So you got to take my car. She didn't own a car at the time. So I was like, okay, take my car, just do this thing, and I'm going to support you. And what struck me, I was going through the memories of this, and what really struck me is I remember we had like this very kind of passionate scene between the two of us, young lovers, and we were like in the shower together, and we kind of like made love in the shower before she was going out on this date, as people do in that romantic way. And I think what made it so impassioned was really that she felt this freedom. She felt free, and it relieved this huge thing on her. And then I think the reason why she felt like so emotional towards me and grateful for me in that moment was that, I mean, I knew her really well, and she was like, okay, she feels free to do what she needs to do. And so I in a certain sense, this is the uniqueness proposition, I suppose. It was giving her that gift of this freedom. So she went out, and I can remember like pacing around the apartment, like, holy shit, this is stressful as fuck. It wasn't like it was like I was totally fine with everything from the beginning. And, you know, I had certainly moments, you know, but ultimately the experience is kind of built. I got one other one kind of to share about this, a little bit around this, unless you have something you want to say about it too, Daniel. Okay.
No.
So I had like, ultimately, I do talk about this with students, but I don't really ever like give up the content of the memory. But my most powerful memory then, as this built, the most powerful memory I had with my psychologist mentor, Dr. Michael Schnur, like another person I'm really grateful for, was I had gotten to the point ultimately, and I'll talk about more how this built for me, but I got to the point for me, like after that experience, a lot of things were just like gone. Maybe I should even talk about this actually, because it's like I was going to talk about how this felt to me. All right, maybe I better do this for this to make some sense. So for me, what did I feel and not feel? I better like kind of talk about that a little bit. So looking back, I had moments where I could have handled things better. I'm not going to say I did everything perfect, but I did things not bad, you know, and it was a learning experience for me. I wanted to talk about the feeling like, did I feel, but I was a young person. Did I feel cucked or like I was a simp? And the answer was no, ultimately. I had moments where I had feelings I had to deal with, but I mean, in the deep level, for me, I knew what she was saying was true, you know? And I think the feeling of being honest about it was like stronger than any of those feelings. You know, I was like, no, what she's saying is true. She's right. I can understand why she'd feel this way. I empathize with why she would feel this way. She's not wrong. You know, we love each other a lot, but we haven't had this experience of the world. It's going to be something that's going to hang. She's right. You know, she's right. And she's going to need the freedom to do this so that she can kind of know who she is and even feel comfortable with what we were doing between the two of us. So I had a lot of the similar thoughts. There was like an old Seinfeld episode where Kramer's going to break up with someone and then she breaks up with him first. And then he's completely like screwed because he spends the whole rest of the episode begging her to come back. It's a big bit. He was like, damn it, if I just would have broken up with her first. Because I had a lot of the same thoughts going on. You know, I knew what she was feeling. But I thought, okay, so this is like, she's not wrong. I get it. Now in Zen, they have this thing they call shugyo, which is like intense training. They kind of describe it as like the kind of thing where you're doing a metallurgy to a sword and you just beat the shit out of the metal and you just really work it. So in a certain sense, when I learned Zen later on, I realized like, well, this was a kind of an emotional shugo for me, this whole set of experiences. It put me through this major transformative thing that was intense, especially obviously things around maybe possessiveness or jealousy, which, you know, whatever the feelings I had about that, which were complicated. But I essentially went like through those things. And the weird thing for me in the end, Daniel, which I guess I've been trying to get to the share with this, is the fact by the end of it, it was just gone. It just like burnt those feelings away. And I just didn't have them anymore. And when I got more into the Buddhist framework, it changed the way I thought about like the kleshas, which are the kind of negative Buddhist emotions. And I have talked with the Buddhist goddesses about this too. And I was like, okay,
Eric, just illuminate a couple kleshas just for people.
Yeah, I'll go through it. Yeah. I've talked with the Buddhist goddesses about these kleshas, and there's like really supposed to be 5 of them, right? There's ones about kind of like greed and possessiveness. There's ones about like sort of unhealthy attachment. There's ones of sort of specifically about like envy and jealousy. And there's one kind of more specifically about ignorance. You might see different translations.
Yeah.
But that captures the gist of them. And so when I got to like thinking about those later on, I was like, yeah, for me, for how I ended up looking at this, a lot of those emotions were tied into maybe how I felt like relationships were taught to me in my culture. And when they were burnt out, this is just talking for me. I'm not trying to say anyone else has to feel the same way as me. But the end for me, I was like, yeah, you know, like this experience with my first love, going through these things was good because it really forced me to look at these kleshas. And then they poofed out, they vanished. And it's been kind of an interesting experience then. You know, insecurity things too, as we talked about in some other episodes, but it really was the kleshas. And then I was just a kind of a transformed person. And I probably went, whatever I had to be, the uniqueness versus exclusiveness thing in me, it went really uniqueness. Like, if that's on a continuum, I was on the far end of the continuum because I had gone through these experiences who were very intense around these very intense emotions, and they were just gone. And then by the time I was seeing my psych mentor, Dr. Michael Schnurr, I realized like, well, I'm just not an exclusiveness person anymore. I'm something else. I didn't even know what a word was to call that. And I still don't know if there's a good word. We're going to have people to come on and talk about polyamory. I have friends in the polyamory community in Chicago. Whether I really identify with that, I don't even know. You know, words are words. there's
Right.
things that they feel that I probably don't feel. And,
Sure.
it is what it is. We can talk about that maybe a little bit later, but I knew I was thinking differently, and I can remember like going to talk with my psych mentor, Dr. Michael Schnurr, and I was in his office, and this was very anxiety inducing for me because I was about to explain, like, I don't feel the same way people feel about love and relationships. I don't feel the same way. And if you've ever been in this kind of a situation, you're talking about like those moments of intimacy where you can open up, Daniel, and really like say what you really think. I was really nervous about this because I thought I would say this and maybe he would say it was psychologically unhealthy or there was something wrong with me. I didn't know what he was going to say. I trusted him and we had known each other for a long time. But in that moment, in that particular question, I didn't know what he was going to say. So I remember like being super nervous. It's a very weird kind of anxiety. You know what I mean, Daniel? Like you're really going to, you see it with patients too.
Yeah.
This moment where someone's really going to tell you something that's really important for them and they're a little nervous or afraid. And I had those feelings, really afraid of probably being judged on some level, as we're talking about judgment. So I remember like I had all this tension in me, but I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And so I like said this thing out loud to him. I said like, okay, this is my experience. This is what I think. And I'm just different now,
well,
than maybe what the culture would be. Yeah.
On one hand, when you express something deep, it's more difficult to do it with people whom you care about.
What they say will matter.
Yeah. Because they have a place, because again, I'll go back to the nervous system analogy. You're relaxed around them. Your systems can intertwine more easily, that they can impact you. Their words and their energy can impact you more deeply. And so when you expose something, it's something you probably kept hidden from them, which there may be a little bit of shame about, or maybe not, but
that I knew what I thought or felt about it, but I was afraid of being judged. That's for sure.
Right. And then right, based on if you perceive that they may judge you, that their thoughts may, butt up against what it is that you believe in. That's a whole other thing that is going to get you to have to at least look at it, in a different way.
Which either you'll decide, okay, maybe there's something wrong with how I'm thinking, or you might decide maybe my relationship with this person is affected.
You're correct. Those are both. You're either questioning yourself or you're questioning the other person. And when you have a close relationship, both sides of that is hard to do, especially when you're working through something that is as difficult as part of your core kind of like way that you look at the world, really.
Yeah. And like probably like what we've been trying to talk about in these relationship episodes is how you feel about relationships is huge. It's going to have a huge impact on your life. It's not small.
Because you're always in relationship.
You're always in
not in a relationship. You have an opinion about them. You have a feeling about them, even if you're not engaged in one.
So it was this moment of like all of this tension in me. And I think authenticity too. I felt that pressure, which we've been talking about a lot.
Yeah.
I have to say what's true to this guy, in this psych setting, but still I have to be true. Like the Carl Rogers thing. I'm going to have to say what's true. And so there's this whole big buildup and I finally like blurted all this out. And his response was amazing to me. It was one of the in all my experiences with him, it was like this feat of psychology from my point of view. And he just said, okay, well, that's cool. So then what does that mean for you? And it was just like all of that tension just dissipated. And I was like, because I was studying to be a psychologist too. And like, as part of this set of experiences, I was like, well, that was just some badass shit this guy just did. Because all of this internal tension, he just diffused it like that. And like one fell swoop. And he just said, okay, that's cool. You can feel however you want. That's fine. That's who you are. That's cool. Now let's just figure out what that means for you going forward. And, how do you live that out in a real way? And I was like, God damn, this is a moment. So it's really one of the we're talking about some of the more important moments in our life in this podcast. Sometimes we share.
Mm-hmm.
I think because we don't want to have a spiritual podcast that's just like, let's just talk about some platitudes. We want to make it real, so it's a real moment. It's like, now, one of the funny things, I can't remember if you and I talked about this ever off camera, but when I talked to him last time, it was around the time we were having Bob Thurman on for the second time. And I talked to him about, this whole thing, we were catching up, and I've been meaning to catch up with him again. We're supposed to go out for lunch or something at some point. He had some health issues.
You and
me and Michael.
You and Michael, not you and Bobby T.
Bob Thurman. He's in New York doing something.
Yeah, but we should have him on again.
We should. I wouldn't mind torturing him about this question.
Yeah, that'd be good.
No, we did it a little bit. We asked him about his divorce and we asked him about stuff and he talked pretty honest about it.
Yeah, he did.
He divorced and it wasn't easy, right? He went through his own kind of Buddha story where he felt like he had to leave his first marriage, and it was not easy. So anyways, I asked Michael about this, and I said, well, this moment was the biggest moment of our whole
time together,
therapy together.
Yeah.
And he basically, his response was, I don't remember anything about that. And I was like, dude, it's one of the biggest moments of my whole life. He was like, I don't remember that specific incident at all.
He's like,
That was a long time ago. He sees lots of patients, but whatever. We've known each other, so that was really funny. So anyways, I had this series of moments like this where it was me sort of coming to terms with this. This other one is a little bit bizarre because it involves Jung and Freud, and it's just a little synchronistic. It was so weird, Daniel. I think at the time when I was an undergrad, I didn't even put these two events together. The Carl Jung lecture with Dr. Anderson and this thing with Susan, they didn't even click in my mind. And what's weird about it is I don't think I knew that word synchronicity. I don't think it was in some old Police song, from that old like group back in the, but I didn't know what it meant. So I don't think it clicked. That this weird synchronicity just was the same fucking semester. And I didn't like tie those two events in my mind together, but it's obviously Jung would say, well, that's a synchronistic event, but sure, because I didn't know the concept, I don't think it stuck with me, which I think is also kind of interesting for our episode, because if you know a word for something, sometimes it'll stick. If you don't know the word, you might not even recognize it. So it was kind of a weird thing. I don't think that really stuck. But I went and I toured Freud's house in Vienna at one point pre-pandemic. And it was 2016 because I looked it up, because it was the year that Deadpool came out. So I saw Deadpool.
Another important point in your life.
Well, it was weird in a funny way. Yeah. Because I saw Deadpool with my daughter in Vienna, and we had been to Freud's, apartment where he and Jung had met. And I'm interested in those people. I teach classes with them. So it was kind of a weird moment. Then we saw Deadpool, and then and we'll figure out what we want to talk about, but I had met another soulmate person, and we had known each other for years. And I was contemplating our relationship with one another. And I was thinking about all these different things around this. And I was back at the, Airbnb kind of place we were at in Vienna. And, I can't remember the name of the lead actress in Vienna who plays Deadpool's love interest. I can't remember her name. Do you remember the actress? But she's pretty great.
Yeah.
So I looked her up because she had been in other shows I had watched before, and I was just curious about her career. So I looked her up on IMDb, and they have a quote for each person, which you read through at the bottom, they'll have some quote from whoever that actor is. And hers was, I think it's perfectly fine to be in love with two people. It probably just happens all the time. That was the quote they had. And I was just like, yeah, this is like, for some reason, I think this is fine. So in a certain sense, in this episode, I was quoting her at the beginning, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is something. Obviously I feel this way. And it was sort of a process of me going through this. Probably the last one I'll probably try to share real quick would just be like how, like with my relationship with my daughter, because it's been quite interesting. In the household growing up, I really made sure that there wasn't a lot of support for jealousy. My feeling, and this goes back to the cultural part, and we can debate this, but my feeling in the culture is there's a lot of promoting of jealous feelings. What do you think, Daniel? Do you think that's true?
Yes.
Okay. I think it has to. I think it's like that. And we can talk more about that when we talk about the culture. So there was always this thing where I wasn't promoting those, but I had never really talked with her about how I thought about some of these things until, because when she's a kid, you're not going to talk about these things. But when she got to be older, I did talk with her about this. And I got like a little text exchange we had. I kind of made sure I had this for today. I was really talking with her about feelings for people I had in my life. And I know how this is for you, Daniel, but for me, I talked a lot with my dad about things, but I could have talked more. And he didn't. I would have liked to know what he really thought in a deep way, about things that we never had a chance to talk about, or he wouldn't talk about it. I would have loved to know more about what he thought about his relationships and love. He told me things because in moments he would be very revealing, but I would have loved to know more. And when I became a parent, I thought, I don't want my kids to feel that way. I don't want them to feel like there's a mysterious quality to me, that there's things that they don't know about me or whatever. I don't want it to be that way. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think though, when you get to certain stages in your life and you've had different experiences being a parent or going through different relationship experiences, work, whatever, that your mind changes, the questions that you're able to think about change. Unfortunately, that is in exchange for time. And everybody has different, we'll say, starting points for their time frame in this life. And so those kind of questions that we probably are prepared to ask and want to engage with our parents, grandparents, older teachers, whomever, they might not be around by the time we get to them.
That's true.
That's the hard part. True. That's the hard part about it. So yes, I agree with you, but I also want to make a point that, like, if you have people in your life who are deeply connected to you, whether it be familial or you hold somebody in a high respect, like how you had your psychology professor or your psychologist, you know, to be as open and forthcoming as you can, because the time is limited. And like we've talked about numerous times before, once that person is no longer here, then those opportunities are done. They're finished at that point, you know. That's true. And so but it's hard because it's like, you don't know how you're going to be in 3 months from now, let alone 10 years from now, 15 years from now. You know what I'm saying? So I think but the more, I guess my point more is like to make the effort to try and be as open as possible, because I think that fosters communication and it allows the other person to say, oh, you're coming from a very, like we use the word authentic a lot. You're coming from a very authentic place, a very curious place. So maybe you might pull some strings from them that open up different parts of their mind that can then illuminate parts of yours. And because you hold them in high regard, they can have effect on you in ways that you might not have even imagined, actually. And so there might be some regrets later not getting to certain topics, but I think if you can get into those deeper spaces, even like how you had with your father, you might be able to glean how they may look at topics based on your interactions with them on a whole host of other topics, because inevitably there's more questions than we have time to ask.
It was weird because when, you know, with my dad, I went through a lot of kind of change in my personal life, my relationships as I was leaving grad school. And I did bring things up to him and we talked pretty deep, and he told me about his experiences before he met my mom and some of the things that, you know, he went through. So we had moments like this.
Sure.
And I realized, like, well, that's what I want to be able to do as a parent for my own kids. I want to be able to share this so they can know the real experiences.
Right.
You know, my dad had moments like that. I give him credit. My dad, you know, had his positives and his negatives. He had definitely was troubled in a lot of ways, a lot of anger issues, but he had moments of real honesty with me, where he would get down to the bones of things. And I remember those moments with a lot of fondness.
Mm-hmm.
So I was talking with my daughter about this whole thing. And I was like, okay, I was talking with some stuff, even in my own life. I was like, well, let's talk about this. I'll share some of this with you. And I said, it means a lot to me. I texted her. So I pulled the text up. I said, it means a lot to me that you and I are able to talk and that you accept me, you know? So I was basically saying, good for you for being an open person and an open-minded and open-hearted person. The reason I wanted to say something is important to me because that I am so honest might be unusual, though I hope not weird. So I brought that up too. And I said, the thing is, I don't feel people should feel ashamed of who they happen to love. And then I said, love is a funny thing. It kind of can strike where it wants, kind of like the lightning. And I did a little lightning emoji in the text. And people feel ashamed or guilty. And I put a little ... there. But I said, if you feel ashamed of who you love, you are basically feeling ashamed or guilty about who you are.
Correct.
See what I mean?
Yeah.
Question mark. And I've always wanted to make the point between us, be who you are and don't be ashamed of it. And I said, I love you, Beans, which is her nickname in the fan, like my nickname for her, because she came out like a little bean. So I told her I was going to use this. I said, okay, you mind me doing this? And she was, no, that's cool. So then she wrote back, and it was a little bit ironic. She said, you know, this is beautiful. She said, thank you, Papa, genuinely. She said, I got back to like from the library, you know, in undergrad, she went back from the library back to the apartment, which was saying, and all of her roommates were like sobbing over their relationship problems in the kitchen. So he said, it's really funny that this timed out this way. So she was kind of doing her moral support. And then she said, I actually have many thoughts. Sorry, let me go back to this, make sure I do this the right way. Then she said, this made me feel so happy, Papa. I feel an overwhelming in my stomach love for you, which is funny because I think it's the only real conception of love that I really have, because she hasn't been in love herself, really. She's like, her love has been like, really, her experience has been through like more the relationships more within family things, you know, me or her brother or her mom or whatever. And so they said, and so this was so beautifully written, which is nice of her to say. And it's funny to me to think that people can feel ashamed of who they love. And she says, I actually have many thoughts about this now that I'm writing, but essentially, you know, I think life is a beautiful thing and love is mainly what makes it so beautiful. And then she makes this little joke, because it's all around us, which is a reference to the movie Love Actually, which we watch every Christmas. So anyways, that was her response. So I guess I was like bringing that up because it also, this whole thing kind of impacted on what I thought parenting was on some level. I don't have any expectations of her to like have any particular attitude of what she wants to do with her life. She can be whoever she is, which I think is a non-judgmental part. We talked about that last week with my brother. My brother and I are different, you know? I was just talking about doing this episode with my mom, nice 83-year-old mommy. And she was like, yeah, your brother and you are really different. And what happened for me is once this came out with Michael, my whole family has known this for really since I was an undergrad, essentially. So I went and it became like kind of like a thing, and you know, talk with all the people, and my family was like, okay, cool, that's how you feel, that's how you feel, which was kind of, again, a comforting thing. So as we get to the end of the episode, and I'll throw it back to you in a second, Daniel, but ultimately when I look at the whole thing, I look at back like with this incredible sense of gratitude for like the whole experience, because it kind of changed and involved me in this kind of brand new way. And I think part of it was I realized that as much as anything, I wanted to like define my own idea about life. You know, we talk a lot about like clashes with society and things, but I suppose in the end for me, it was like, I wanted to find what I think is true, you know, and that could be spiritually, that could be in terms of love and relationship, that could be in terms of my work. I wanted to come to my own truths. And I think this was a real push in that direction. And I thought that was really important for a more psycho-spiritually meaningful life, which I realized was sort of my deepest heart's desire. And I also brought back this whole idea, which is maybe my capper for this part, of like, what is this karmic meaning in love and relationship? Because we had this very intense relationship with this person, and she transformed me. She transformed how I thought about love, because she was just unique in like every sense. Like most people wouldn't say what she said. Most people wouldn't propose that proposal, you know, but she was like, okay, let me throw this out here. You know, she had that openness to her, which I loved and admired. And when I looked back in the end, I mean, it was really through, in weird ways, our relationship that I got involved in doing Zen. It changed the way I thought about love. Like a lot of like really positive things came out of that. So even though there were difficulties in it, I had to go through challenges emotionally to work with these kleshas, you know, these Buddhist negative emotions in me. It paid off like in a way that I'm like extremely grateful for. So anyways, that's my capper for this episode. I guess we're wrapping up. So I want to give that as my capper, but let me throw the mic back to you. What do you think?
I mean,
anything you want to share? You'll share whatever you want, obviously.
no, I think the most important part and the place that I want to end it is that's the last piece that one of the last pieces that you said is not feeling ashamed about who you love. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the most important part, you know, because essentially who you love is an expression of who you are and what you view as valuable. And, you know, of course, practical Dan got to come in the building. So long as that love is not a destructive force in your life.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, that you have to go through and experience what it is that relationship has for you. You decided based on however you decided, right? Maybe you're using your nether regions to decide, or maybe you're using, you know, your psychology to decide, or maybe you're conversing with your own inner divinity, as we called it earlier, you know, to help you, you know, move forward with some particular relationship. But like that energetic connection changes people every time, you know, and as most of us probably know, audience included in this, every relationship is a little bit different. Even if you have a particular quote unquote type, you know, there's some body style that you like or whatever, you know, ethnicity or age, I don't care, whatever. but they're different. People are different, and you guys we're making a different stew, every time we intermingle. And so to feel like, I don't know what the right word is, but the opposite of shame, pride, something like this, in who you're attracted to is also says that you have a pride in who you are and about making your own decisions, which I think is a powerful place to be, because I feel like in that place you can accept mistake, or you can accept, we could say maybe tumultuous outcomes as a factor of you being engaged in your life as a teacher, as opposed to like allowing other people to have power over your decisions, and then you're never really living your own life. You're living the life that someone else thinks that you should be living, when in reality they should be doing their own thing, and you should be doing yours, and finding what that means for you in your own personal development. So whether we are actors in each other's plays, or whether we are plotting together in the previous existence before we come into this one to break each other's hearts, or whatever, build sukkahs, or depending on what you're into, I think it's important really for people to feel, to not have that shame as a part of their expression of who they are, really, because these are the times in which it matters most, because we're always present. And being who you are in a deep level when you're interacting with other people allows that person to know you, and allows you to know them, and it allows you to know yourself. And if you're not doing the deep dive on who you are, I don't know what else is more important, to be totally honest, in this life. Obviously compassion, helping other people and whatnot, but figuring out who you are in all the various ways is important. So I like that. I like that as a capper.
It's a great ending. I think the whole idea of like to be ashamed or feel guilty or feel any of these like feelings about who you love is to feel ashamed of who you are on some level.
Yeah.
And I think like this conversation with my daughter was then really important for me, because we've had conversations like that before, but it was like, we put it down in writing even, and it was like, okay. Yeah. And you could see that it was like, it really says like to me to her, like, I accept you for who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Okay. Great ending. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and ultimately when you're with somebody, you can't, there's some people like, oh, this person likes to play games, or this person likes to do this. Like ultimately when you're paired with somebody, whether it be exclusively or uniquely, whatever, you're still in a pair, and
there's still a connection between you and that other person some way or another.
Yeah. You're not going to be able to hold up whatever game you're playing for a long time. Like you can't keep that up. It takes too much energy for you to not be you. So you're going to be you at some point, and if you don't know who that is, well, then I don't know how anybody else is supposed to, so.
Yeah, just as a sneak preview maybe for next episode, and I told the person that I might do this, I get permission if I'm going to talk about people. I got a very like a deep set of like, I'll call them voice message rants from a listener.
Oh,
that maybe I'll share next week around this whole question, because she's, they were very profound, and I was like,
yeah, rant is probably not a good description for that, then, Eric.
Rant in the best sense of the word. I love the word rant.
Okay, yeah,
rant. I love like a good rant,
like an angular tangent that might be impassioned but also misguided. No,
I like rant in the sense of like, I'm going to tell you some shit that's real. I like that version of the word rant. But anyway, so that's what she was doing. And I said, well, do you mind if I talk about this in the podcast? Because you're really getting to the heart of what our episodes are talking about. So maybe that'll be the sneak preview. And she's really asking a lot of questions about what, like, she talks about a lot of things, but one of them is like, I have to be able to love from an authentic place. Otherwise that's not real.
Right.
She's really asking that question very deeply. So a little preview, maybe that's the wrap up episode on a lot of this for us. Cause we'll do like whatever the social issues are. I'll share a little bit the voice message thing, what kind of captures it. And I mean, I think we'll talk maybe about the social aspect of this, but we did the personal aspect. So thanks Daniel for letting me kind of share this, and thanks for people for listening. And
always.
Hopefully Blue Goddesses are smiling that like I didn't fuck this up too bad.
It's all good.
All right. Thanks, man.
All right, brother. Well, for Eric, this is Daniel. Let's see what else we want to do. If you're on the YouTube video, like, give us a like, subscribe, comment. What's up? We're active. We're very socially active, if you will, and unprotected. Even
I'm going to start like doing the shower curtain of wisdom things now. Once the episode from last week dropped, I was like, that we recorded last week dropped, I was like, I'll start doing it. So if people like it, they like it. If they don't, it's don't. But that's cool.
Is what it is. But hit us up on the YouTube. Leave a comment in the you know, I don't know where else you can leave a comment, but you know, send us an email at ginandtantra@gmail.com. You can leave a comment there. Or
We'll be doing like quotes of the day on Instagram. So if you want to like
yeah, there you go.
Connect through that one.
Yeah, that works too. You know, if you're friends with us on Facebook, feel free to, you know, write something to us there. If you're not, Eric Baker, Daniel Dumolekny, you see us in the descriptions of this thing. And yeah, you know, it's all love, everybody. Don't be ashamed about it. We'll catch you in the next one. Peace.